The Nature of the Psyche, Its Human Expression by Jane Roberts. And this is the introduction. As I write this introduction, I've already forgotten those many anonymous nights during which Seth, my trance personality, dictated this book. Only the session notes taken by my husband, Robert Butts, tell me what particular daily events we were engaged in during the time of the book's production. One thing is certain. On session nights, I went into trance, and as Seth dictated these chapters, the triumphs and defeats of any given day have more or less vanished, but those nightly hours are somehow contained in these pages, and to that extent they endure. Is Seth actually my trance personality, though? A native of timeless psychological realms who sends his messages to our time-tinted world? Or am I Seth's trance personality, living in space and time, nearly forgetful of my heritage? Perhaps I'll really never know. My continuing experiences, however, show me that Seth's personality is stamped upon the sessions and his writings, and perhaps also upon my own consciousness in unique ways. Unless I turn into Seth, go the whole way, alter my very psychological alignment, unless Seth smiles and speaks, there is no Seth material. So, although only 2 people are in our living room on session nights, it's also quite fair to say that we aren't alone. I know very well that there were evenings when I should have held our regular Seth session, but didn't, for reasons also forgotten. Perhaps I didn't feel up to par, or sat at my desk involved in my own writing. Perhaps an unbidden guest dropped by, or holidays intruded. Actually, I was quite concerned with the quick passage of time and the pressure to prepare manuscripts for publication. During the period that Seth was dictating this book, Rob was typing up the 2 volumes of Seth's previous work, The Unknown Reality, and adding innumerable notes that correlated Seth's material with that of his earlier books. I knew that on session nights, Rob lost his work time on that project, and he still had to type up the latest session notes on the following day, while all I had to do was, what? Turn into Seth? Many correspondents write, commenting on the dramatic element of the sessions, and surely the entire affair is a richly evocative psychological drama. Most people, however, don't realize the time or work required to keep up with Seth's seemingly endless creativity, the sessions to be typed, the various stages of manuscript preparation, or the simple persistence necessary so that the sessions continue, despite life's normal distractions. Rob typed Seth's other books, Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul, The Nature of Personal Reality, and the 2 volumes of The Unknown Reality, added his own notes, and did almost all the work of preparing them for publication. He was still working on The Unknown Reality when Seth finished this present book. Then, almost immediately, Seth began another, The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events. I'd been producing my own books during this time and getting them ready for publication, so surely Seth wasn't taking up any creative slack of my own. Still, I stared at Psyche when Seth finished it, wishing that he could type too. I thought back to all those remembered trance hours, looking at them. No, I thought back to all those unremembered trance hours, looking at them from a different standpoint, and almost startled by a simple thought that just hadn't occurred to me in quite that way before. Those trance hours were productive. They yielded results in the world of time, that trance consciousness, by whatever name, knew what it was doing. And I wondered, what must I look like to Rob as I leaned forward as Seth, smiling, my glasses off, Seth's eyes darker than mine, joking as Seth, gesturing, waiting while Rob got me, Jane, a beer. I'm sure there's a kind of trance memory, but my ordinary memory records very little of those trance hours. Yet I can't remember offhand what happened in my normal daily life during those past days either. So real time and trance time have each vanished. And this week I'll go into trance, and again Seth will dictate part of another book that Rob will be typing up from publication a year or so from now. And then this today will also be part of the past, in our terms. I say in our terms because the sessions themselves seem ever present, despite all that I've just said. They seem to contain an energy that comes alive in Seth's words, so that they belong to the future as well as to the past. Those words were all originally spoken, spontaneously and emphatically, though slowly enough for Rob to take notes. They were enunciated in Seth's own peculiarly accented tones, accompanied by gestures in a living performance that I hope the reader will keep in mind. Piles of trance hours. Here they are. But if I was in trance, was Seth also? He certainly is alert, active, responsive, concerned about people individually and in general, and about the world. And yet I feel that only a portion of his consciousness is here during sessions. That the part expressed through me, so that whatever the nature of Seth's native experience, his performance in our world only hints of a psychological complexity quite beyond our present understanding. In Psyche, Seth addresses himself to the matter of human sexuality for the first time in his published works, discussing it as it relates to the private and mass psyche, and connecting sexuality with its spiritual and biological sources. As most of our readers know, Seth began calling me Rupert and my husband Rob Joseph in early sessions. He explained that these were our entity names, and I was half amused to have a male one and to find Seth referring to me as he or him. When I had classes, Seth gave many students their entity names also, and there was much lively discussion over the names' sexual designations. Now we discover that such references were tailored to our own rather limited ideas of the qualities assigned to the sexes. For in Psyche, Seth makes it clear that the psyche is not male or female, but a bank from which sexual affiliations are drawn. He stresses the bisexual nature of humanity and the importance of bisexuality, both spiritually and biologically. But Seth's bisexuality is a far vaster concept than the ones usually suggested by that term, and he sees it as the basic source from which our sexual definitions arrive. What are those definitions? How many are basic and how many are learned? It is to such questions that Seth addresses himself. More, he ties his discussion of sexuality with the birth of languages and the nature of the hidden God. The psyche is not only the repository for sexual affiliation, however, but contains hidden abilities and characteristics which are then triggered into activity by exterior stimuli. In Chapter 3 of Psyche, Seth says, quote, "Certain mathematical formulas are not imprinted in the brain, yet they are inherent in the structure of the brain and implied within its existence. End quote. According to Seth, our own desires, focuses, and intents dictate what inner information we draw from the endless fields available, for he sees all knowledge existing at once, not as dry data or records, but enlivened by the consciousness that perceives it. The minds of the past and future are open to us, or at least their contents are, not in a parasitic relationship, but in a lively give and take, in which knowledge from each time period enriches every other historical era. Seth gives this pooling of knowledge both a spiritual and biological reality. The implications of such statements for education are astonishing. Besides teaching rote information, our schools and universities should acquaint us with as many fields as possible, for these act as exterior triggers, bringing forth natural inner knowledge, sparking skills which are waiting for activation by suitable stimuli in the exterior world. While Seth dictated this book, devoted the potentials of the psyche and its reception of inner information, my own experiences, as usual, seemed to serve as object lessons backing up his thesis. Seth had hardly begun Psyche, for instance, when I suddenly became the psychic recipient of a book on art philosophy and techniques. It purported to come from the worldview of Paul Cézanne, the famous French artist who died at the start of the century. Seth began discussing worldviews in his Unknown Reality. Simply put, a worldview is a living psychological picture of an individual life with its knowledge and experience, which remains responsive and viable long after the physical life itself is over. So the material I received didn't come from Paul Cézanne per se, but from his worldview. Actually, while getting the book, I felt like a secretary taking mental dictation. But what dictation? Oh, for this manuscript not only presented a fascinating picture of a genius at work, but gave specialized knowledge of the field, art, in which I am at best an amateur. Seth himself did the introduction, first dictating his own material on Psyche, and then switching over to the Cézanne introduction during the same session. That book, The Worldview of Paul Cézanne, was published by Prentice Hall in 1977. No sooner had I finished it than another similar experience happened. Just as Seth was completing Psyche, the after-death journal of an American philosopher, The Worldview of William James, came the same way, like mental dictation, only where the Cézanne worldview had specialized in art. The James worldview was more comprehensive. It commented in depth upon our world since James's death and covered American history as it was related to spiritualism, psychology, and democracy. According to Seth, any of us can tune into such extra information, but we would receive it in accordance with our own desires and intents. My own interest in art and Rob's appreciation of Cézanne's works helped trigger the Cézanne book, for example, and my own curiosity about William James and Rob's appreciation of his work helped bring about the James manuscript. Seth maintains that inner information often comes into our minds, though it is sifted through our individual psyches and tinted by our own lives, so that frequently we never recognize its source. Sometimes this happens in dreams or as inspiration. Inventors, for example, might be receiving a given idea from the future or an archaeologist might make a discovery as a result of receiving information from the past. Seth maintains that our inner knowledge usually merges so smoothly with our present concerns that we seldom recognize its source, and yet it provides the individual and the species with a reliable, constant stream of information through a psychological lifeline to which we are each connected. He discusses in depth the experience of early man and the different organizations of perception that prevailed, and stresses that the species has always had access to inner data, so that its source of knowledge was never exclusively dependent upon exterior circumstances. According to Seth, it is from this interior body of knowledge that our systematized, objective information storing social processes emerge. It follows then that precognition should be involved in evolutionary alterations, so that the various species would prepare themselves in the present to take on those changes that would be necessary in the future. And in all of this, as always, Seth stresses probabilities as playing a vital role in the development of the individual and the species, and as representing the basis for free will. He sees the psychic experimenting privately with probable actions in the dream state, and envisions humanity's mass dreams as providing an inner vehicle by which man chooses global events. The psyche is private, yet all in all, each psyche contains access to the public psyche. As Seth makes clear, however, this book is not a dry treatise about the psyche, but is constructed in such a way that it will put each reader in a more direct contact with his or her individual psyche. It includes many exercises to acquaint each person with that deeper portion of the self, and invites the reader to search into his or her ideas and experiences on many levels. Distorted beliefs about sexuality can hold back psychic or spiritual progress, for example, and Seth discusses such issues thoroughly. The questions of lesbianism and homosexuality are also considered, along with their private and social effects. We are most eager to get this particular material to the public, since many correspondents write requesting Seth's views on sexuality. This desire, coupled with Seth's seemingly endless creativity, led us to a decision. From now on, the Seth books will carry far fewer notes. In the 2 volumes of The Unknown Reality, Rob tried to correlate Seth's views on various subjects, tracing them backward to his earlier books and often to unpublished material, showing the context in which the books were written. Now we will include usual session notes, but the reader will have to keep track of the development of the theories or correlate them with previous Seth books at his or her leisure. At this writing, Seth is nearly halfway through The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events, which will show where and how private beliefs become public events. I have finished the publication Emir's Education in the Proper Use of Magical Powers, and the further education of Oversoul 7. All of this, Seth's books and my own, surely gives evidence of the psyche's vast creativity and of its abilities to perceive and use information that comes from the inner as well as from the exterior environment. Books are my specialty. For others, this creativity may show itself in family relationships and emotional comprehensions, in the other arts, in the sciences, in sports, or simply in lifting the quality of living to a newer, richer level. And this concludes the introduction.